Hello, this is your host Akhil Navluri, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Techospace podcast series. So, in this podcast episode, I'm super thrilled and honored to welcome our guest, Mr. Bora Ger, who happens to be an AI strategist for the Capgemini Global AI Lab. So, Bora, it gives me a super pleasure to welcome you to this podcast episode. And how are you doing? And how are the things in Frankfurt at the moment?
Hi everyone, and thanks first and foremost for having me. All things going great so far. Lots of exciting topics popping up left and right, as you can imagine. We're living in exponential times, and it really shows.
Amazing, amazing. So I believe, Bora, at the moment in Frankfurt, like there's a lot of, things going on with Bundesliga. I think people are, deciding like which team is going to play and, which team is going to win. Is that the chatter that's going on around? I'm not wrong.
Well, I'm located in Frankfurt, but my heart beats for a different club, I have to say. Yeah, I'm originally from Karlsruhe, but of course, I'm
Mhm.
following what the Frankfurt team is doing as well. And everyone is, of course, in a better mood and pleased when they play well. But do they have a shot at the league or the cup this year? I don't know. Let's see what happens.
All right. I mean, I'm looking forward because, Frankfurt really is a good team that's coming up with a lot of, amazing prospects and they're playing well in Europe. But anyway, I mean, enough of the football topic. Let's get started with, with the actual agenda for today. All right. So, Bora, let's kick off with the podcast episode. So, Bora, from your point of view, I want to understand this. Like, what led to the development of the Gen AI solutions and how did that lead? I mean, and how did that boost the productivity for particular roles and specific tasks.
Mhm. Yeah, I think what we see specifically now with GenAI over the last 2, 3 years, when it really like hit the market, right? I mean, there has been AI obviously as solutions in the market before that, but we really now see in terms of solutions in terms of GenAI, the LLMs, and of course also everything else that is now in the market. It really shows that we have these kind of tools now that we can use in our daily lives together with teams. I think that's the real difference here that we can say like, oh, by the way, I have all these kind of things going on in my daily life that I can now use and utilize, for example, be it my meetings, be it basically kind of emails that I'm writing, but also let's say, oh, kind of all these new things like, oh, I have a framework here in mind that I want to work on. These are now particular things that I can do, obviously, with these tools at my hand right now. And again, not just one LLM, but all these LLMs now popping up left and right. I mean, it's almost like these days that every week we have something new to celebrate, right? I mean, there was this huge DeepSeek moment just like 2 or 3 weeks ago. Then, of course, OpenAI uh, came back with the O3 mini models, but now we're looking forward to see what Grok 3 can do, right? So everybody's claiming the top of the hill, king of the hill spot almost every week now. So I think that just puts us as users in a beautiful spot because competition is great for us. We can always see now what kind of model for what kind of solution really delivers the best outcomes, yeah, from personal use, from a team use, or even from an organizational use perspective. And I think that is what it makes it so exciting, not just in terms of personal productivity, but also, and we probably get to that a little bit later, looking at team solutions, at sector solutions that now come into play.
Awesome, awesome. Now, when you were talking about the DeepSeek and the Open AI, I feel that, it's more like an LLM wars that's going on, or let's say Gen AI wars. Like, big, like earlier there was, I mean, I'm not going to name the companies, but there were two soft drinks that used to have a war. So it's almost like, on those lines. So having said that, Bora, do you think that, is there going to be a time in the world where, if a customer goes to a supermarket and he tells that, I want to buy a particular cool drink or let's say a particular snack. So will the shopkeeper himself have an LLM model of his own where he's going to say, okay, you need to try this? Like, is AI going to go in that route?
Hmm. Well, I think to a certain degree, unless unless you for some odd reason made a strategic decision to go otherwise, you already have the supermarket in a sense as that you are not really bound or tied to one model again, unless you decide to structure yourself that way. But there's not really I think, strategic incentive to do so, right? I mean, on the one hand side, it's like, oh, I have here one key provider. I work directly, let's say, with OpenAI, and therefore I have these and that advantages. But having said that, given that you have these fast developments and the different quality of models in the market, infrastructure-wise, strategically, I think you want to be open when it comes to what kind of models you use. Because again, what is if you have a login and all of a sudden you have new contenders that are super interesting and smart, but you cannot utilize them? I mean, that's obviously a huge disadvantage, but also in terms of cost, flexibility, as we have seen, cost of models, of tokens, of utilization of these models has been going down historically anyways. But now it's like you have a model that all of a sudden has like a 10 times, a 20 times lever on cost, and assume you're not able to leverage that right away, right? I mean, that is just not something that you want to do. So having said that, you already have this like garden of models, so to speak, that you can choose from, and you can put yourself in a position to realize a reality where you choose the model related to what your use case or your use cases actually want to achieve. So you don't overshoot with a super expensive model. You don't also, let's say, under perform in terms of choosing something that is not fit for the task, right? And I think this flexibility gives you a lot of room now, also strategically, to do the right things. Again, as you said, what does the future hold? I guess we have to really consider what new models really bring to the table, but also what it means now in terms of knowledge retrieval, but also what would be a good way to put it? Not just retrieval, but also knowledge creation, where we can say like, okay, this kind of goes towards like zero, right? Like, so knowledge, the cost of knowledge is basically zero, but also creating this kind of knowledge goes basically also towards zero. I think Sam Altman kind of called it. How did he call it? He said like something like the cost of intelligence moves towards zero. I think that's how he phrased that. And I think that's basically true in terms of what we see here from a week to week and month to month basis. Everything seems to become more ubiquitous as we speak. Specifically, I think super interesting is something that we didn't see like a year or so ago, the opportunity to own your own model. Like if you not talk about open source or open weight, so to speak, right? You can own your model, you can host it either in your private cloud or even locally. You can adjust it to your specific needs, yeah? And of course, with all the caveats of cost, total cost of ownership of these kind of models, but again, gives you the opportunity to do that. And a couple of months ago, even, or a year ago, you wouldn't have considered that. And that, of course, also puts pressure on the providers like OpenAI or Anthropic with their proprietary models that are still obviously super competitive and continue to do so. But again, there are now options for enterprises out there to go in a different direction. And I think, again, very good for us, gives us the choice to go for solutions that also strategically make sense for use cases or for organizations who say like, hey, I want to own my infrastructure, my AI, and of course the data that goes along with it. So
Yep.
again, very good development in general.
Amazing, amazing. That's a very, very concrete explanation, Bora. So now, Bora, like now when we are talking about the thing that you are, which you're currently focusing on, your next project. So Bora, like, give me a deep insight about that. Like, what about the paper that you're publishing, which talks about, the strategy in the age of AI. Like,
Mm-hmm.
like, give me a deep insight of it completely.
Yeah, I think the super interesting thing, if you look at the market or you have been looking at the market in terms of AI and what organizations have been doing, is on the one hand side, a lot of pragmatism, which I like, and you just start doing your POCs and then try to scale them, and then there were natural like boundaries. And again, if you don't have really like an end game scenario or a vision where you want to go with this, it's apart from the technology challenges, it's hard to scale, right? Missing governance, missing idea where to go with it, future picture, etc., etc. But then again, if you look at traditional strategy frameworks that treat technology as tools per se, I think those fall short. Why? Let's look at it a little bit like from a yin and yang perspective, right? On the one hand side, you'd maybe say like, hey, now I have AI and it can like supercharge my existing business strategy. So it can be faster, more efficient, faster go to market. So all the beautiful things that you want to see, bring costs down. Yeah. Super important also in the current, let's say, economic climate. Yeah. So I'm not saying that's wrong. On the contrary, that's great. Yeah. But I think what those approaches completely miss out on is the transformative character of what AI brings to us. And I mean, not just Gen AI, but hybrid AI and all these solutions that we're now looking at, potential agentic systems, complete vertical integration of AI agents in the future, and so on and so on. I think here we really see the transformative power also of what AI can bring in terms of new business models, different access to clients, and so on and so on. So we have yin and yang. So we have both sides, not just here is what's happening in terms of strategy, and now we're going to just move this forward, but also, hey, what is it that we're going to change here right now, right? Different markets, different services, different products that now going to look very much different to what we have seen before, based on, right? Also, again, AI opportunities when you look at it and when you see what currently organizations are doing with that. So again, a yin-yang kind of situation where both sides make sense, the transformative part, but also the enhancement part, so to speak, from your existing strategy. I think bringing this together and thinking for a strategy from in the age of AI from a more holistic sense, looking at both sides of the coin makes a lot of sense.
Awesome, awesome. So, I mean, Bora, like you just give me a complete insight about the paper that you're publishing about. So now let's go back to a prequel. Let's say, go back in time when you actually got the inspiration. Like what led to the inspiration of, coming up with this, thought-provoking concept with respect to the AI space?
Yeah, I think it was, I mean, again, I have been specifically when it comes about consulting and the line of work that I'm in, writing and thinking a lot about the disruption of consulting quite some time ago, because if you talk about disruption for other sectors and clients you work with, you probably should also look at the mirror and reflect a little bit what's happening in your own home yard, right? But what I figured here as well, consulting internally from a sector perspective, but also in the sectors of clients I've been working with, that there was really again, this rather narrow understanding of what the future should look like in terms of what in the past has been, right? It was kind of a extrapolation of what made us successful until here. We're going to continue and enhance here and there and here and there. But what it has shown as well, specifically in this age of digital transformation, so what we have seen for the last 10, 15, 20 years is why are there so few winners and so many, if you want, yes, losers who have invested so much into so-called digital transformation. And I think one of the learnings from that, let's say, fact is those who have interpreted digital transformation as something that is more or less introducing technology, implementing technology, and calling this whole piece also technology transformation, reduced the idea of digital transformation very much to a conglomeration of even sophisticated IT projects, right? And that was even framed in terms of business transforming, but did it really transform the business? How many new business models have been developed based on the fact that you introduced cloud and S4HANA and Salesforce and whatnot, right? So you have all these platforms and tools at your hand, become more efficient, more harmonized, more streamlined, open up data ports for utilization to do something with it. But where did it really happen, right? So you have these top tech players, and if you look at the most valuable and so on companies of the world, and the list looks as it looks, and you see a lot of formerly big players of the 20th century that seemingly haven't succeeded in shifting their focus and their, let's say, innovative power to what now matters in the 21st century. And I think that development is just what we now see in AI, but on steroids, right? The ones who are using AI now in terms of like, oh, I have, for example, my apps and my software and whatever I'm doing, and I'll try to enhance it with AI. And then they're the ones who now think about AI in terms of like, AI is something, if you want to compare this to an historical event of the past, like the introduction of electricity. It's gonna be everywhere. But does it just mean that everything is going to be just the same now just with AI? Or is this just completely changing how everything will look like, right? And just to now pick one example, in the past we talked about B2C business, B2B business, and now entering the AI agentic age. Oh, now we send out agents doing stuff that we don't want to do manually out to the web, for example, to order something or request something, information retrieval, and so on. But the whole web is basically made mostly now for the human eye and for the interaction of humans with, for example, websites. And even though that is the case, it's not necessarily pleasant to work with those websites. But in the future, it's very much likely that those pages are going to be more attuned to agents, right? So that the interaction works much, much better. So again, so all of a sudden it's like business to agents or agents to agents, right? So all of a sudden we have a very different situation going on. And there you can see, oh, okay, that's different. And I think that really kind of makes the case, wow, that's really a change that's going on here. And that is much, much more than that we used to do in the past. And now looking forward to how this changes the landscape in general and also for us as consumers.
Amazing. So I think, there's a lot of shift when we take, when we look at things, like you were saying, business to consumer, then, business to business. Now it is agents to agents. So everything is just going in a skyrocketing way. So this is no exception for that.
Yeah, it's not happening overnight, obviously, but I think it just makes sense to think this from the end game scenario. A lot of things will happen along the way, and there will be a hybrid world. But again, we're still at the beginning of this development. But if you think about, hey, if I can do these kind of things already in terms of simple automation, agentic automation, and then also reasoning capabilities, whatnot, there are a lot of challenges to overcome, make no mistake, right? So it's not like, by the press of the button, this all works and wonderful, and there's no problem with that. But again, we see a lot of promise right now, and there are already solutions that we do employ right now that work and that create that kind of value. So now think that in terms of scaling, think that in terms of new APIs, new standards, new platforms that are then agent friendly, so to speak. So it will be and a strategic advantage to think your platform or your website or whatnot in terms of, is it easily accessible for agents? Because again, if I'm all of a sudden, if it's not like a niche anymore, like people who use currently, let's say, OpenAI's operator or something alike, okay, to automate certain activities they don't want to personally take care of. And they figure out, wow, this particular web page, even though I like the services, is really hard to navigate with agents. But there's a different web that actually does that in terms of what you receive in terms of value, almost on the same level, but it's much more accessible for automation. That is an advantage, an obvious advantage, right? So that is something now in the future to consider that probably people haven't thought about weeks, months, and years before. And so again, it's really shifting how we interact, how we do business. And it's wise, I think, to explore right now already what that really means and where this might lead to, than just sitting on the sideline and let other people figure out what the modus operandi will be.
Got it. That's amazing to know. Now, Bora, just give me an overview of, the advisory services that you're providing with respect to the ethical AI implementation and governance. So I just want to, a deep overview with respect to that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that is obviously a concern. Ethical behavior of AI, the more, as we just spoke about, utilizing, be it, again, it's not just about LLMs, but let's make that for as an example. If you're using LLMs for information, also enabling action in the digital as and in the physical world, what are the boundaries, right? And also what are the ethical standards that we want to see established in that sense? And I think there's no, and that the practice shows there's no necessarily common understanding or common ground yet, and also potentially unlikely to be there, globally speaking, what ethical in terms of AI development and also utilization really means. I mean, we have, for example, now the European AI Act, and I think also for good reason, is apart from the fact that regulation is important in terms of what we want to happen with AI and us specifically as well. No questions asked, but a lot of criticism how and what the AI Act actually delivers and what it does, specifically if you're not a player who sits at the table in terms of AI power play, and I think that's not helping. But again, even if this kind of regulation came from an, let's say, AI powerhouse nation, let's say, for example sakes, the US, would that be a framework that is true and would be adopted by the whole world? Probably not, specifically not, let's face it, for example, China. Or other countries where, for example, China now has a huge influence also infrastructurally when it comes to AI and data. Let's look at the African continent, for example, right? So what we're looking at here is not necessarily just a smooth, straightforward process in terms of where we're heading, in terms of potential alignment on ethical AI. I think that's going to be a continuous battle also for standards and an understanding what we want to see to happen to us and with AI and whatnot. And there will be different standards as you shift your perspective to one or the other continent of this beautiful planet, right? And it starts with a specific example. Do we want to allow, for example, facial recognition in the public space combined with AI, combined with all these potentials for analysis, and then of course there comes up the argument, yeah, well, if you have nothing to hide, why do we even bother? But again, I think the slogan, if you don't have nothing to hide, is probably the laziest argument ever, because assuming that our ways of living and the governments that we have around us and the structures are just super stable, are never going to change, and never going to act in let's say, or would always act in our favor. I mean, that it's probably a very naive position to have. So again, what kind of power do I want to hand over to technology, but also to those who create governance for the technology? That's not a trivial question. The only thing that we are all aware of and absolutely 100% sure is that we do have to discuss it, and that we do have to establish a conversation of what we want to happen, right? Because otherwise, others will make those decisions for us. And now if you look globally, there's a different value system across the globe, and we need to make sure that we feel equally represented in that game.
Awesome, Bora. Now, Bora, now if I will, if I would twist the question, or let's say reverse engineer the question for you. So, I mean, if you tell me that, like, if, I mean, you're just telling me that, there are a lot of regulations with respect to the AI. But if I ask you, will AI sustain without any regulations, or if they sustain, what are the consequences that it's going to create around?
Again, I mean, we do have regulation in place, obviously, to a certain degree, and it gets changed all the time. It gets reverted, as you've seen now in the States. And pretty much goes back to, I think, what we have just discussed. It's an ongoing conversation, and with every, let's say, new solution that comes around, we have to ask those questions again and again and again, right? I mean, let's take, for example, I mean, it's not, and it might be something also not so obvious. AI is not just per se the technology to look at primarily, right? Because we have the fusion of different technologies. Let's take, for example, augmented reality. Those augmented glasses, more or less successful in the past, but now more contenders trying to be successful in the market. And we have the Ray-Ban, Meta collaboration, and so on and so on. And you have to look at it from that perspective. It's not just like, oh, now we look at augmented reality and it's a completely different case, and so on and so on. No. What happens if you have these kind of glasses and you perceive now your surroundings in a certain way, and it's now connected also with AI, right? So what does it really mean? Do we want to allow that in every environment? I mean, let's imagine you have these glasses on, and I can basically identify people on the go and where they actually come from and where they live because I have access to social media, stuff like that. I mean, it's not hard to imagine what that would lead to. in terms of what we now call doxing. So I know where you live. I mean, what stops people from being like, no, let's move to the most expensive restaurant or whatever in the city, set those glasses on, look around, and then figure out who's currently not at home, and you send your squad there to clean up the place. Huh? I mean,
Yep.
that's exactly what you can make now completely possible in a large scale way around the globe with these kind of solutions. And not even speaking now about information theft and whatnot. If you wear these kind of glasses now, not just AR augmented, but AR plus AI augmented to make these kinds of things happen. I mean, sounds like a very negative way on these kind of technologies, but again,
Yep.
as much as we are supposed and rightfully so be excited about these kind of things now to come and to us enhance our life with all these positive use cases, we cannot stop and shouldn't stop, but also assuming what else can be done with this. And if we ignore that, that means it will be done anyways, and we have no solution in place and no idea in place how to handle that. And I think therefore, there's where regulation comes into play, where we actively have to identify where do we stop? Where do we clearly say no to a certain solution or to certain actors pushing solutions, even though there might be or there is a clear positive case for it, but the risks outweigh everything else that might come out in terms of positivity in that case.
That's completely agreeable on that, Bora. Now, Bora, heading on for the next one. I just want to understand. I'm pretty much sure that you have a complete uncanny knowledge about things, and when it comes to initiatives, also, I know you're always spot on. So, Bora, I just wanted to understand, what are the key initiatives that you have, employed to, convert a traditional data model into a data-driven powerhouse? Like powerhouse, I mean, that actually resounds a lot. So, just give me a walkthrough on that.
Yeah, I think talking about data, obviously without data, there's nothing AI-wise can possibly happen, right? So again, that makes a lot of sense. But again, if you talk about data and data-driven powerhouse, I mean, this is not just about the data itself, but it's also like, hey, how do you actually treat data, or how you go about data as a company, right? And I think that is super interesting to look at. Why? Here it comes. It's not just necessarily, okay, how you go about it structurally and yeah, you have all these silos in the organization anyway, and you want to harmonize. If it's like a data lake or you have a mesh data approach, whatever, that all makes sense. But for me, it's much more like, what's your general attitude to data and behavior? Normally, you have the situation, especially in the corporates, if you want to access specific data in one part of the company, it's really hard when you're from a different part of the company. So what's the governance? What are the rules? What are the gatekeepers? What is it in terms of process you have to go through in terms of, and maybe even a business case that you get access to specific kind of data to make use of it, okay? And the more complex an organization, the more governance and the more of these roles and so on and so you will have. And let's say it's not necessarily a catalyst, or it does not necessarily speed up things. I mean, it can differ obviously from organization to organization, but again, I wouldn't consider this like a data or AI first company, right? Now let's turn it around, not necessarily technology wise or structurally. It has an impact on structure, obviously, but more from a belief system or mindset perspective. If you'd say, you know what? No, let's turn this around. Data has to be accessible for everyone by definition. And if you want to, quote unquote, hide or let's say protect your data, for that case, you have to have a business case, right? So otherwise, if you don't share data, you're doing it wrong. And again, if you're doing something wrong in a corporate, you get reprimanded and that has consequences. But again, leads to a very different approach to how I gather data, how I have to maybe store it and also make it accessible to others by default, right? And I think that is an approach, and again, being aware of very sensitive data that probably not everybody should have access to, but here we talk about now the specific niche cases, not the general access to data. And I think if you get that switch going in leadership first and foremost, but then also on the operative levels, that data is not like, again, like knowledge is power, and therefore I only give you if there's something like an internal marketplace or something, right? I mean, again, understandable if organizations go for that, but nevertheless, I think those who say like data is per definition open and accessible, and we look for synergies and how we can create value together, those companies most likely will have a better time in terms of their, let's say, AI transformation and roadmap and delivering actually internally and externally great services and new products, they are certainly an advantage.
Awesome. But if you ask me personally, Bora, like you were saying that data, people are just, accessing the data and they're putting it in different places, in different data centers or let's say cloud. When with respect to the data lake house or let's say, sorry, the data lake, data bricks or data mesh. But if you ask me personally, I feel that data is like a sensitive topic, and that's why people are taking their own set of governance to actually protect that.
Mhm.
So I feel that in such a case, it is good to an extent, but the data has to be accessible to the people who are working on that particular project, or let's say on that particular thing in the company, if you're
Yeah,
understanding what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
yeah, and again, since I've been talking like data, right? Like, or is it big data? Is it like everything? Actual interesting use cases come with very specific data needs. So it's rather like niche data or very specific data that you want to have with also the quality and however it's arranged, right? And I think even more it makes what I said before important so that you have all that access to the different types of data, because depending on the use case at the end of the day, you want to be able to have access, if you even own that as a company, to that specific data sets that even enable you to have or to develop these kind of use cases. And often it might be the situation that you don't have that at all or not enough to make a good case out of it, which means then you have to access external data that you might have to buy, or even or maybe you can create it synthetically, right? Which is also now an option. But again, if you now look at it, if you have this open mindset for data already, first of all, you made everything that's internal potentially available or can be collected much more likely to be there for you, and you can create value out of that. Plus, the likelihood that you have also then easy ways to connect that with external data, however you purchase that, or create synthetic data as well. Again, it's much more likely than if you were looking at a closed shop kind of scenario, siloed shop scenario, where this is also like a more internal competitive marketplace, because that means, okay, again, barriers to data fluidity and being able to just explore and bring different ideas together. Again, it's not just about the amount, but also the quality and the specificity of the data that you own, that make you what you described earlier, a data-driven powerhouse. And again, what kind of data you need and over time may change. Again, helps if you have a healthy attitude to make data open and make it more accessible for everyone in the organization.
Indeed, indeed. So, Bora, like, do you think there's going to be a time, where people say that, people are accessing data left and right? Sometimes there is a misutilization of data going on. But do you think that people who are working in the organization, will they come to this kind of a situation where they have to use a thumb kind of a situation, let's say a finger lock situation, or let's say face recognition, or let's say two-way, authentication kind of thing? Do you think such kind of security approaches are going to come in the future?
I'm not sure. I mean, talking about security measures, I mean, that's different. Again, we have been talking about now cybersecurity and these kind of things, right? Yeah, right. Depending on what kind of models you use, and then you have to have that conversation. Okay, what risks does this bring with? And now we had this conversation, for example, about open models. Okay, we have to look at that. Open model doesn't mean I can just take it, download it from, what do I know, GitHub or someplace, and run it locally and it's going to be safe. No, of course, there are several things that have to be regarded, for example, when I use open source models as well, because there can be malware in there, there can be malicious code in there, it can hide uh, in the pickle files, or they can be basically parts of malicious data all across the model, right? So there are several, let's say, necessary steps in terms um, of security measures that you need to take before you make actually those models viable, let's say, for enterprise use. And even if it's like just personal use, it's your personal data, and you want to make sure nothing wild happens with it, right? At the end of the day, so it really depends on what you want to do in terms of data, in terms of models you're employing to make sure that it's all safe and sound. And what comes with that, and again, AI, it's not just LLMs, but we always come back to it. If you use these kind of models, they all can be manipulated. And you can say to a certain degree, they come in a biased, manipulated way, as is when you start using them. I mean, there was now a lot of talk again because of DeepSeek, and now it's a Chinese model that there's bias and it's not telling the truth about certain historical events and so on, which is true. It does exactly that. But if you're really honest about that as well, looking at Western models, they come with a lot of bias, not just reflecting as a Westerner, but also if you look from an Eastern perspective, with a lot of bias as well. And what does it tell us? That basically all models are flawed, and no model is just per se telling the truth. And it's just like I'm prompting something or making a query to a model, and all what I get is basically the truth and nothing but the truth. Again, you need the experts to double check, and that is why we talk about this. This is why we still deal with hallucinations, no matter how sophisticated our setups are. So there's still the human in the loop necessarily, and that again is also, I think, a necessary and will stay a necessary part of deploying solutions to ensure that what is produced as an outcome is valid and makes sense and also viable for business and specifically mission critical solutions. I mean, think about healthcare applications, think about defense and military applications. Can we really afford to have a system that is just 90% accurate in terms of what's going on and give that automation functions? Probably not, right? So there's a lot more that needs to be included in these kind of solutionings in the solution itself, which is much, much more obvious than just an API LLM call and a request and an output. That's not how it works. And often enough, it's discussed like that, basically, in public. But there's way more to it in terms of sophistication, architecture, safety, layers that ensure that all these solutions that we provide and that we're going to build are safe and sound and viable and scalable for larger, let's say, purposes.
Understood, Bora. So now, Bora, like, we always have this kind of a tendency where we come up with a lot of ideas. Now, when we talk about ideas and, collaborations, we think about a word called community. So I just wanted to understand, like, what gave you the inspiration to build a community that has more than, like, let's say 30K plus digital leaders and innovators in it. So what exactly went into the creation of this?
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea, and now looking at like 31K whatever followers that you've been now mentioning it, it's much more now. And why I did this, really having these conversations with all sorts of people around the world, and it's not just like about, oh, okay, 30K and whatever. No, it was really like about, okay, what are they doing? What's the next thing they're working on, and so on and so on. And I think, wow, this was way more interesting to understand. Hey, what have you been doing? What is it now that you are going to build, or what you're working on, and making all these connections online, just specifically during the COVID phase. I mean, made just a huge difference, right? Like really being able to connect to people, working on collaborations, also just having this kind of knowledge exchange. I mean, I've been working a lot, really not just at the laptop on the computer with people in the field before COVID, when we were out there much more. And I think the best ideas always that came up were developed in workshops, working with people and so on. And of course, COVID changed it drastically during COVID, but now also afterwards, way less physical meetings, way more happening digitally. And this is why having this access on social media, be it LinkedIn, and building that kind of community and this interactions on the digital platform that also lead to analog meetings in the real world, is not just, let's say, a solution to still have this conversation, despite now that we don't meet as much physically anymore, but just in general, to have an easy access to talent, to great ideas all around the world, right? I mean, if I now look at those 31,000 plus connections, I think the smallest part basically is now from Germany, where I live, and the much bigger part is from Europe and the US, and a lot of people in India, and so on and so on. So yeah, that spurs ideas and conversation much more than it would be possible if I was just in the physical world. And I think that is why I can only encourage everyone not just to use these kind of networks as like, hey, look, here's my CV and whatnot, but really connect with people and be interested. And I think you can learn just so much on the platform, despite that there's a lot of, let's say, not so interesting stuff as well. but you can learn so much, not just on LinkedIn, but also on other platforms. If you look at the top people in your niche, right? For example, if you look at AI development, yeah, if you have a conversation on LinkedIn on it, for whatever reason, whatever it is, I can guarantee you there's a conversation 2 weeks before, almost, on X. Yeah. So if you connect with the right people, and if you then, of course, want to be a little bit ahead of the curve and discussing these kind of things and creating ideas and also a position already, and when it actually hits the mainstream, let's say, conversation also out there, that's super helpful, right? And again, I can only encourage people to find those niches and connect with people and have this dialogue already, basically constantly whenever they want to invest the time.
Indeed. I mean, I just wish that, there's a lot of good initiative going on with respect to the community that you have built up and, where you can, I mean, having a lot of knowledge transfer between people like across the world. I wish that, your community just reaches the mark of 100K. This is what I
Mm-hmm.
wish.
Yeah,
And
this sounds
it reaches
like a good target number to have.
absolutely. It'll definitely, come to that stage and, it's going to reach, the far reaches of the sky for sure.
Perfect.
Amazing. So now I know you've just mentioned this to me about the AI agents. Like if we have to go a little bit deep about it, I just want to know like what is your take exactly on the AI agents and the AI implementations associated with
Mm-hmm.
that?
Yeah. I mean, let's not beat around the bushes here. I mean, AI agents is now the next big thing in 2025, and everybody's talking about it. And yeah, as it usually goes, you have all sorts of hype, and what comes with the hype is also then the demystification and the disillusion, what those agents can do and cannot do. And yeah, I think what really helps us here is to have a clear definition of what we actually mean here by AI agents, okay? And yes, we have to consider agents is not a new word, and it has been used already. And you could now basically opening up like this full like portfolio of types of agents, and scientifically speaking, that would be correct, and it makes a lot of sense if you want to take that lens, okay? But in terms of now translation to the market and what makes a difference, I think at least I prefer a more pragmatic approach to defining what it is and how it differentiates to what is also there, right? And very like, let's say, some might consider that too narrow, but the differentiation I want to look at is like, hey, what is just standard, also let's say autonomous AI workflows? Okay, what are these AI bots and assistants that we have not been seeing a lot that we can have a conversation with and they generate output and whatnot? And what are actual AI agents that have agency? I mean, again, means that they can sense, that they can reason, they can take decision on your behalf in the digital world, in the physical world, and they can learn from that because they have memory and so on and so on. And as I say that, you already get the idea, okay, wow, okay, sounds way more powerful, but also way more, let's say, complex, right? So, and again, yes, potentially, I mean, it doesn't mean an agent per se has to be complex. Technically speaking, actually, you want to build your agents as niche and as simple as possible. And then if you have more agents, you want to orchestrate that. But what it also comes with is not everything needs to be an agent, right? Again, hype. No, we need agents, and everything is also named something agent, right? It doesn't make sense. So if there is the need for automation, yeah, let's go for it. And maybe you don't need agents. Maybe it's just really a workflow, or maybe you have something like an assistant and that triggers some sort of automation workflow as well. But again, having agents and more agents as a system, right? That's a different flavor, and that's something else that we're now looking at. And I think that needs to be regarded as well. And it's not just something agents, and basically it's just the same as we have been doing before. It's not that, right? And I think that is why we should look at that from a different angle.
All right. So Bora, like I just wanted to understand this. Like, what is your take on AI agents and AI implementations with respect to the Industry 4.0 and life sciences? Now, I'm finding this word 4.0 very fancy. So can you just give our listeners a walkthrough about what exactly is the Industry 4.0?
Mm. Well, in general, we talk about let's say the connected world, so also connected manufacturing, if you will, right? So it includes all sorts of technologies, not just AI, right? It's machine learning, but it's the Internet of Things, IoT, connectivity, also the way sensoring works, augmented reality, and so on and so on. But it really, at the end of the day, means that we have almost fully autonomous industrial setups, yeah, where everything works together. For example, if you know, think about automotive and you have all sorts of different production sites, and if, for example, it becomes clear that in one side something is missing and another side has that in terms of stock, it gets automatically rerouted, so you never have any shortages of any kind whatsoever, just as an example, right? Logistically, those kind of things, right? And that basically everything you do in the physical world has also a virtual representation, be it a digital twin or a virtual twin, that either you can monitor everything digitally to also predictively maintain everything in the digital world to um, ensure that you have no breakdown, and you can also ensure that whatever you want to bring in terms of novelty of process, you can test appropriately first in the digital realm before you roll it out in the physical realm. I think that kind of, just example-wise, puts it a little bit together, what we often mean by Industry 4.0. But again, it's much more than that, and everybody has his or her definition of that. But also in healthcare, when you talk about that, AI in healthcare, I mean, many roads to go down, and there have been a lot of words, thrown around in the recent past, like personalized medicine. What does it mean that you have like really treatment, or let's say also, to use the same term from the machine world, predictive healthcare, in terms of you're still healthy and hopefully you stay healthy. And so we talk about longevity here, to get older, but healthy, in a healthy way, because nobody cares to be 100 when you suffer from all sorts of diseases, right? And I think here a data-driven approach, which is difficult because of a heavily regulated environment, and nobody really wants to give for free whatever has to give in the world of healthcare, and also due to obviously regulatory bodies, that makes it hard to, and rightfully so, access personal data in terms of healthcare. But again, there are wonderful, let's say, scenarios where you can, for imagine, have something like a personal health assistant or even proactive agent that knows you better than yourself, and really is your companion in everyday life to ensure that behavior-wise, nutrition-wise, and movement-wise, or in general, choices-wise, supports you in making the best decisions for you and your family and so on, to stay healthy and be active and have the most amount of energy, and also warn you when certain triggers happen that might be negative for you. I think there's a lot happening already and a lot possible that will enhance our lives and our lifestyle if done correctly. And again, that's still something that is developing in some sort of way. And yeah, I think that's just something that we need to regard as well. And there's a lot of opportunity that we should also have a look at.
Absolutely. I mean, especially when you talk about the medical terms, especially like, when a person is going and he feels really not understanding, because a normal person will never understand the medical terms, whether it's with respect to the operations or whether it's respect to a procedure, or, understanding the
Mm-hmm.
tablets, for instance. So an AI agent, if he's like a guide for him or her, I mean, that actually comes in handy, because
Mm-hmm.
it's a mundane task to actually understand the medical terms sometimes, if you are certain people who are from the non-medical background.
That's true. And I mean, and that translates to almost every setup. I mean, when you, for example, join a new company, and it doesn't matter if it's in the medical field or anybody anywhere else, it basically comes with a new language. Like there are different acronyms and whatnot.
Yeah.
So imagine whenever happen to come into a new context. Um, let's say I work for Capgemini, and with Capgemini, and you could say like, hey, if somebody comes in as a new employee, and sorry, I don't speak Capgemini yet. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's a true thing. And now imagine you have something like a companion that explains everything to you, or as you go and as you listen, you get to know people and you're listening to calls and there are all sorts of things being thrown around. You're like, what the hell are these people are talking about, right? I mean, as probably every new joiner
Yeah.
feels to a certain degree when you enter a company or a
Yes.
specialized field, imagine your learning curve goes up like this. And by the way, we see that now looking into a different sector in education for sure. The first, let's say, bigger experiments we see with not AI just giving you all the answers, which is not such a good idea, by the way, but AI as a tutor. The learning curve looks fantastic compared to traditional teaching if done right. So that tells you a lot about not just formal education per se, but also long life learning. If you have something like a learning or like, let's say, coach agent accompanying you through life, I think there's a huge opportunity or many various opportunities in that can create a lot of value as long as you own your agent, own your own data, and make it secure so that you ensure and can decide who gets access to that. Because I think that's where everything stands and falls with, and nobody's going to trust those kinds of solutions or potentially wants to have these kind of solutions if per se it makes you super transparent to everyone else and third parties if you cannot control that. And I know that's a lot asked, but I think that's really the key to the application of AI in general. We have been talking about ethics here as well, right? Ethical AI use is also ethical data use, and it comes down also to data privacy and people being in charge of their own data.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a complete, that's an amazing description of how how you have put it across. So that's perfect. Yeah. All right, Bora. Yeah. Now, I mean, agents have the complete information about us, like what we require. But I mean, do you think that people should have a panic kind of a situation when agents are doing the entire thing for them? Let's say everything what they know about them, like booking the
Hmm.
flight tickets, or let's say booking a hotel reservation, or even booking a concert that they are also not aware of. So
Yeah.
I mean,
I mean, again, why do you want to use agents? I mean, start with that. It's like, oh yeah, it's like I have a hammer now. Let's find nails, right? I think that's not really how we should go about it. What are the things where you think an agent, now on a personal level, right, could help you with? And you just mentioned a couple of examples, like, oh yeah, book me this, book me that, and maybe that's that. But to be honest, I would be interested in an agent supporting me in the stuff I really don't want to spend time on. For example, administrative stuffs, be it work related, be it
hmm,
private, my private life, so that I can focus my valuable time on things that really, really need my attention. Because what are all these tasks where we kind of need to be present and aware, but let's say it not necessarily challenges our critical faculties here, right? I mean, it's just something that needs to get done. Okay. And it's not like obviously doing your laundry, but something that we do still on the computer and so on and so on. So, okay, if it's like ordering regularly something on the internet, it might be just that. And then you can build an agent for that. And if you accept, again, build it in the right way and develop and fine tune it further as you go along, it will be probably a very valuable companion for you as you move forward. And that is true also for things in the realm of business, right? If you're in a specific spot and you want to use, and I think that's a recent anthropic study on that as well, and something that we did in the company quite recently is the impact of AI for managers. If you use it, not necessarily again as just for automation, also agents, not just for automation, but also as a challenger. You have a specific context situation. You're trying to figure out what is the best solution. You now have, for example, agents that support you in looking at that particular challenge from different angles with a lot of knowledge of the past, of you have acted in the past as well, and other circumstances you might, as a human being, not completely aware of. So what it does, it's not necessarily now about automation, but also coming up with new perspective, new ideas, and challenging you in your action as, for example, an executive or a manager before you do or in the end or decide in the end on a particular challenge in a business context, right? And then again, you might then, if you make a decision, be able to play that back to an agent. That again triggers something on your behalf in the wider system of the organization based on what you have learned and what you have decided still on a human level, right? So again, as you can see, it's not so much about, oh yeah, everything agents now, but where do you really want agents to help you? Either because it challenges you or brings a new perspective or can develop something that has not been there yet, or to automate. And when it comes to automation, there's really the question, do you need agents? Is it just a workflow that you want to standardize, which is completely deterministic and not changing unless you want it to change? Or do you really need something that is, let's say, a bit more open-ended in terms of, as I said, can sense new context, can make sense of that and come up with solutions that have not existed before. And I think that is the door to that realm that we're opening right now with agents, sophisticated agents that are super interesting and make us embrace that particular future even more if we again focus on the right use cases.
Indeed, indeed. That's right. I mean, always we have to, look at the right picture and, on the positive light of it, as they always say. Now, Bora, now, I just wanted to understand, like, what would be the security like when all the LLM models are all like exposed to the public, like in a bad way? Like, let's say if you're taking at the negative aspect of it.
Well, to a certain degree, they are all exposed to the public, right? I mean, even the proprietary models, and we know a little about what kind of data they use and how they come about and so on, but they learn from public context. And all the utilization of these kind of models, all the additional data that is fed to those kind of models. So they, as we already discussed, come with certain biases anyways already. We cannot trust completely LLMs when we use them in terms of output anyways, and so on and so on. There are ways to circumvent that, and there are also, I mean, basically, if you look at the models per se, without any further intervention from the user side, I mean, hallucinations are a thing, right? And so it comes up with stuff that's not really there. But that, let's say, percentage of false or let's say hallucinated information has been going down per model already. So that's seems to be improving. Okay, but still there's a cumulative effect of error if you even have like a 2 or 3 or 4% rate of hallucinations. But then again, there's now all the other possibilities to even reduce that potential for hallucination and error further. Huh? So as we move in that direction, one might say, okay, as more we learn about those models and how to use them properly and into what context we set it, because it's never just LLMs. It's then specifically when we talk about agents, LLM is the brain. It's one part of such a setup, but then you have also deterministic models. And you have maybe an ontology layer, a rule-based deterministic layer that checks with every step that the agent does, is it allowed to do that or not, no matter what the LLM hallucinates, because if it's always like checked against the ontology layer, it might say like, oh, well, whatever you come up with here, it doesn't fit to the ontology, so here's a hard stop, you cannot execute on that. Huh? Again, so there's that, but I think there are, coming back to your questions, a whole set of different possibilities what could happen now with these kind of models. And again, we have this east and west situation with Chinese models now on the rise and really impressing people, specifically that they can use them locally and so on. But knowing, hey, there might be more to those models than just performance and open source, but they might come with an agenda. Again, the same true for Western models, but in a different light, so to speak. So what does it really mean, right? And if we like have these kind of models that none of them, like let's say, drive on the purpose of truth here, but they come with their biases and so on, and they change over time. So that's that, and I think that is something that we need to take into consideration, and also maybe we need to pit those different models against each other as well to understand, hey, what does it really mean, and how do those different models behave, and so on and so on. So that's still going to happen, and it's not just about, oh, look, here's an LLM, and that's why we're using it. It really comes down to the use cases and the different LLMs that we are using right now that make sense or do not make sense for us, and that is why we need to check on them, look at them, see what they do, and that's what everybody needs to pay attention to, right? So never just like with DeepSeek, first try to understand what it is, If it's amazing, whatever comes in the future, also check, can I use this locally? Do I actually want to use it in the web with the API? What kind of data am I sharing with it? Even though most people are bored by that, read the T's and C's, the terms and conditions. Is it even something you want to use privately, let alone in a business context? So again, comes down to digital literacy and also now AI literacy. What kind of model do you want to use? And if so, under what circumstances? And it's probably a big task as well. Sift through all the information that you now also get from models and on the web, what's good and what's not. And let's face it, not all the information, again, that you now get outside in the web about models is just going to be facts and the truth, because there's obviously an agenda. Use my model, no, use another model, no, that's really dangerous and difficult. Don't touch that. We all need to skill up. We all need to rise up and understand how do we assess what the situation is to the best of our abilities, and then make an informed choice how to proceed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's completely there, Bora. So now, Bora, like before we, conclude our podcast segment, like let's go on a lighter route. Now it's going to be a complete rapid fire, quick rapid fire. So the first
Mhm.
question to you, Bora, which movies do you prefer? Is it like Marvel movies or DC comics?
Well, again, you need to see that on a time frame. I did enjoy some of the Marvel movies until Endgame, but everything that came after that, not so much, right?
Right.
And again, same like with the conversation in AI, the more, let's say, competition that outside to produce really good movies, and I think everybody can embrace and enjoy that, the better for us. And the more you have just these big conglomerates just shooting out one movie after the other, you can see that it's like they're diminishing returns. But again, potentially enjoyed more of the Marvel movies and a few of the DC movies.
DC movies, yeah. That's that's an amazing answer. Now, what is your favorite street food, like overall?
Well, at the end of the day, probably, even though I have a not pure German background, but if you ask me, yeah, well, really depends on the season. But hey, who can say no to a perfect currywurst with fries? I mean, that's awesome at times. But again, I go for whatever is available locally. So when I'm traveling and in different places, I'd rather try what's best there. You know what I mean? So it's not like, oh, I know exactly, and it's just that. I really just try to explore and see what's new and what's interesting locally. And but also I enjoy that specifically also here at home. But it's always good to have options.
Awesome. Now, if I have to ask you this question, like, would you choose the local food of Frankfurt or will you choose the local food of your native place? Which one would you recommend me?
Well, not so in terms of Frankfurt, it's not so different to where I come from Karlsruhe, and people can argue. But again, if you're in a place like Frankfurt and there's specific, let's say, Haitian cuisine, okay, and if you haven't tried that, definitely go for it. Of course, it's not for everybody's stomach, I'm sure. But I think that's the beauty of traveling as well, or living in a specific place that you don't originally come from. Explore, right? And then you learn to appreciate these kind of things.
Yeah, truly, truly. And now coming to the other one, like, who's your favorite German footballer of all time?
Footballer of all time, wow.
German footballer of all time, I mean.
Comes probably down also to a bias because here are the ones that you grew up with, right? And there's a probably emotional attachment to that. Or I think for so for example, World Cup or European Cup wise, the first thing that I really realized happened was the World Cup in 1990, and then respectively the other cups afterwards. So of course the whole team around Lothar Matthäus, Jürgen Klinsmann, and all these kind of guys, that was amazing. But nevertheless, I think all these guys later on, 2006 and moving forward, those are the ones that I probably followed most closely. And speaking about best players or that really stuck with me, closely is Miroslav Klose. Yeah. So
Oh,
I
wow,
think
what a
that
player.
guy, I mean, he has been around for such a long time and was super successful, right? And I think it was just a great time. This guy, I mean, he has been around for such a long time and was super successful, be it in their respective clubs, but also the cups, World Cup specifically. And that was just a lot of fun to watch this guy play. And because he was like, oh, he doesn't play like Ronaldo, right, or Messi or any of these guys, but nevertheless, he really made an impact, right? And I think he's still the record holder for the most goals at a World Cup, right? Which I think is super amazing if you think about it, because he never had like the, the flair or something like of a Ronaldo or respectively Messi or any of those people. But he was just super effective, super decent, down to earth player, and that's what I really liked about this guy. And yeah, I think that stuck with me.
Awesome. I mean, that's an amazing choice. Even I really used to admire Miroslav Klose's goals, especially. He had that amazing flair with him, seriously. So now the final question to you, Bora, like, what is your favorite holiday destination?
Well, again, of all choices, it really depends on the mood, and now it's really about also the timing. And as soon as you have kids, planning and choices vary dramatically to when you were more flexible, right? Um, but basically, it's like if you go to places and and sometimes it's like you go to places and you're like for 1 week or 2 weeks there, and if you're like, oh, it's now also about time to go home, and it actually feels good to come home. Doesn't mean you have a bad time, but it's like, hey, I've seen enough of this, right? But sometimes you go to places and you feel like, wow, there's so much more to explore, and I don't really feel like I need to go, right? And I think that yeah, that really signifies when you figure out that there's a place that you really really like and you want to come back to. But again, that's on the rare side of things. So I love to travel a lot, and also work-wise, I have been traveling a lot, less now as the world has shifting kind of a little bit in that regard. But again, always feels still good to come home to Germany. But yeah, there are a few places. I lived for some time in Switzerland, obviously not too far away, but also, I mean, work-wise, I've been from Morocco, Poland, Romania, down to the to Dubai, down to Brazil. So I have been to all those places, and every place has its quality, right? And for some, when it comes to some places, I could imagine living there for a certain amount of time. But again, if you travel places, you learn to appreciate your home quite a bit more. So having said that, it's always
Yeah.
good to come.
Absolutely. Homecoming is the best thing that you could ever expect for. Yeah. All right, Bora. It was amazing having you in this podcast episode, and really, really, I mean, thank you so much for taking time from your busy schedule and saying yes to this collaboration. I had an amazing time, having a conversation with you through this medium. And the major thing, Bora, that I got connected was the way you were talking about the AI agents and your complete take on that. The entire. I would just say, if I would recommend anyone who knows the encyclopedia of AI agents, I would recommend you, Bora, for that, for sure.
Please. A lot of people will probably know more about that a lot more than I do, but I appreciate the sentiment.
And along with that, I just was completely, blown by your explanation about, how we are able to handle the advisory services with respect to the ethical AI implementation and governance based on that. And along with that, the inspiration of creating a community that's having like more than 31K plus people in that. So that's truly remarkable, Bora. Hats off to that.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. It was good also talking to you and looking forward to further conversations.
Amazing, amazing. So, listeners, before we conclude our podcast episode, this is an open request to all the industry leaders out there who are hearing to my podcast. If you have any key useful insight or any interesting journey which you would like to share through my podcast episode, you could reach out to me on my email ID, akhil.navaluri55@gmail.com, or you could just message me on my WhatsApp number that's present on the profile page of the podcast. Or there's a new option right now. You could just directly DM me on my Instagram handle, the Techospace Podcast, and whatever key useful, interesting journey, I would get back to you as soon as possible. Who knows? It's going to be you next time, the next industry leader that I will be collaborating with very soon. So, on this note, this is your host, Akhil Lovelory, signing off. We would be back with another podcast episode very soon with another industry leader. Till then, take care. Thank you. Goodbye. Stay tuned and au revoir. Thank you.